Hi guys, so I just thought I would make a little video explaining the process of completing one of my designs. I'll be going over every stage I go through from beginning to end. As you can see on the screen, I have made a little graphic demonstrating the steps I take with every design I make. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in. So before I even draw anything, what I'd like to do is I get my whiteboard out and I start to write down any ideas that I have based on listening to the song or watching the music video. I list any elements that I want included in my artwork and I start developing the overall theme, incorporating colours, any symbols or any other references that I may want to include in my design. So specifically for this design that I'm creating right now for Cryogen by Muse, I wanted to have the band performing beneath a snowy mountain, featuring the Muse logo embedded into the side of it. And because seems to be a sci-fi space themed album, I thought once again I would have some sort of UFO in the background abducting someone. And because it specifically mentions a woman or a girl, I had them being taken by a ray of red light. And then I watched the music video when that came out and they had a waterfall of blood. So I thought that'd be pretty cool to include in the design, so I went ahead and added that. And then for the title itself, Cryogen, I wanted to have that in the foreground as usual, and I just have it written on the side of a canister that looks all neon blue and glowy. So then as for the colours themselves, I was like red and blue. And then for the snow, we'll have some light blues and then reds for the glowing background. So that's how I decided on the elements I wanted to include for this specific design, and basically this is how I start off the process. So once I've got all my notes done and I've decided what I want my design to look like roughly, I start with a rough sketch on Procreate and I begin to establish the composition that I want to have in the final result. Obviously I don't take it too seriously in the beginning, I just start making rough lines and sketches because it doesn't have to be perfect at this stage. I'm simply working out where everything needs to be placed and how the different elements in the design will interact. Once I've completed the rough sketch, I will then import it into Adobe Illustrator, and this is where the real construction work begins. As I've only got a rough sketch, I then start refining all the shapes I have. First off, I'll use the trace tool to then, to vectorize everything. And then once I've done that, I will add in my own lines. I adjust proportions, improve likenesses, and clean up the composition a bit, just to create the geometric structure that will form the foundation for the final piece. And once I've done that, it is time to move on to the next stage. So once I've finished refining everything in Adobe, I then can start creating a limited color palette, usually between 10 and 20 colors. I try and cap it off at around 15 to 18 usually, but rather than just choosing random colors, I do usually stick to a process and I use a website called Coolors or Coolors. I'm not sure how you would pronounce it, but I've got it displayed on the screen so you can have a look at it. And essentially here people can create their own palettes and release them to the public, and I will often just browse through these, picking colors and creating my own palette from their selection. So for Cryogen I chose a variety of free palettes, which I think I've circled in the video, and I used a lot of reds, blues and purples and light blues to create that cold sci-fi atmosphere that I was going for, which you'll see at the end in the final design. So once I've finalized creating my color palette, I will then assign every vectored shape to one of those colors, making sure that none of the shapes that are touching are the same color. I will start off by assigning the darker colors first, as it's easier to get those in place, and then once you follow the shadows along, you can work your way into the lighter areas of the design more easily. So once you've assigned your colors, what I like to do then is, because I've then essentially got a template I can follow to create my design in Procreate. Now this is where I would like to address the tracing thing head on, because I've noticed a lot of my comments, or a few of my comments, suggest that I am tracing or think I am using AI, hence why I'm making this video, sort of. But the reason it looks like I am tracing in my time-lapse videos, if you've ever watched one of those, is because I am technically tracing, but I am tracing the work that I've already done in my sketch and then in Adobe. The reason I like to do it this way is just because I find it easier, other than instead of just redrawing everything once again. I already have the shapes I've made in Adobe, and I can just trace over those and fill them in as I go along, instead of manually redrawing thousands of shapes that I've already created. So I hope that explains it a bit more. If you have any questions, then you can leave them down in the comments. But with all that said, we can move on to the final stages. So once I have all my PNG files exported from Adobe containing all of the vectored shapes that I've created, I will then import them into Procreate on a private layer, each of them on a separate layer. I will then trace each of the shapes, going from darkest to lightest usually, or I will just start in the bottom left hand corner and work my way up. I will then repeat this process layer by layer until the image has been reconstructed. The reason I do this is just because I prefer the final outcome in Procreate rather than Adobe. I just think it looks cleaner, and plus you get the final time lapse to finish it off. So by the end of the process, I've transformed an initial concept and a rough sketch into one of my fully fledged out designs. So I think that's pretty much everything I've got to say. Yeah, so with all that said, I shall see you in the next one, although I'm not sure when I'll do another one of these videos. But I hope you enjoyed learning the process of my design work, and I hope you enjoy my future designs. I'm going to stop speaking now.